So when you're decorating and starting to think about decorating this time of year, whether it is for fall or for Hanukkah or for Christmas and any number of holidays, both secular and religious, that are coming up. I think there's about 30 that happen between now and the first of the year in the United States. So we want to accommodate and we want to try and help you decorate as inexpensively as possible. So the basics with bow making: you need ribbon or fabric, paper, whatever you're going to make the bow out of, and you need wire, because that's the easiest, best way to tie it. Now, there are some ways you can tie with string and so forth, but for the most part, wire is easy. Now, for the demonstration, I'm going to be using chenille stems, old-fashioned pipe stem cleaners, if you're of my generation, and because it will be easier for you to see what I do with it. This works great, especially if you have a variety of colors, then you can kind of match your ribbon. But even if you don't have a color that matches the ribbon, by the time we get done, you really don't see much of whatever you use as wire. We also have wire. Now, the most economical way to buy wire, you can buy them in pieces or you can buy it on the paddle. This is 26 gauge. Now, if you're working with gauges, you may or may not know that the higher the number, the thinner the wire. And of course, the lower the number, the heavier the wire. If you get something like a 6, you're making really heavy wire lawn staples. So you're using something more commercial. If you're working with 32, it's almost thread-like. But what we're using is 24 or 26 for most bows. This is easily found at craft stores, Walmart, all kinds of places that sell wire. You just want to make sure it's a gauge you can work with. The easiest bow to make is a single loop bow, and that is a loop on each side and tails. If you have really wide ribbon, that can very easily be done. Keep in mind, with your width of ribbon, the wider it is, the more length you're going to have. The thinner it is, the smaller pieces of scrap you can use. So if I'm going to make a single loop bow, I'm going to take about a yard. And how am I going to know it's a yard? If I'm just eyeballing it. Approximately from your nose to your hand is approximately a yard. So if you have scraps, that's an easy way to tell. Of course, when you're purchasing it, they're going to actually measure it. But when you have this ribbon, what you're wanting to do, and I'll make this backwards so you can see, you're wanting to form what would look like the breast cancer symbol, or a collar if you're used to tying a tie. And what you're going to do is take the back, which would be the back of the collar, and pull it up to the front. And we're going to do some scrunching. Yes, that is a technical term. Ha ha ha. But what we're going to do is we're going to use our fingers to kind of sew it and scrunch it together. Now, the bow I am making is of a ribbon that has very thin wire along the edges. What I'm going to do is double check and see, okay, are my loops about right? As far as size, if they're not, we can fix it afterwards. But what I'm doing is I'm making a hairpin, a bobby pin type form with the curve in the middle. That's going to be the front. And then I am going to, you've already scrunched this. You're not hurting the ribbon at all. So what you're going to do is you scrunch that and you're holding on to it and twist the bow. What that does is tighten toward the center. And after a couple of twists, look at the front. And on purpose, I made one side a little bit smaller. So while you can still work with it and manipulate it, you can pull a little from the sides and you can make it more even. Now, again, if I was using a yellow or a gold, there would be absolutely no, or even for that matter, wire, you wouldn't see anything in the center. But this is a bow that you'd be buying that you can make with just a scrap or a yard of material. Then when you're finished, you want to make sure that you have tightened this completely so that it holds, but not so tight that the wire breaks. Now, to finish your bow, you're going to trim it up and give it a haircut. What you're going to do is cut it at an angle. You can see the difference between cut and uncut. It just looks finished.
I want to cut with you.
This tail could be 4 or 5 feet long if you're doing a door ornament, or it could just be a couple of inches like it is. And I try not to make them exactly even because we want it to look natural. Now, if you do, by some chance, have something
Turn mine down a little bit, but listen,
where you're seeing with your ribbon and what you're using, you're seeing your wire. It's very easy to use something appropriate. Now, because of fall, I am going to use just a small comb. And I like using a cool hot glue gun. Yeah, I know, it sounds really weird. But it's cooler, and because of that, it will hurt, but it won't cause a blister. A hot glue gun will. And I will put that in the center until it cools, which really isn't going to take very long. If that's not enough, I can, of course, come by with other things, and we can really decorate that bow up. We can make the bow, oh, that wasn't as dry as I thought it was. I apologize, it had not cooled. It never does it the way I want. It always likes to embarrass me. But once you've got it there, yes, you've got a little bit of the webbing from the plastic in the hot glue. And again, we can do something where you're putting a little something else there if you want to give it a little bit more oomph. And what you're doing is you're just trying to work with that bow to make it A, inexpensive, B, something you can handle yourself. I'm going to do one that's going to be a little bit more complicated. But this is where you start, because then you get used to scrunching, you get used to working with ribbon. And I would suggest when you're practicing, definitely work with a color you don't like. Then if you don't like it, you can throw it away. But if you don't practice it, it's like anything else. If you don't practice it, you don't get it down. So try to get this first and then move on to a more florist-like bow. And I'm going to be showing you that next. And when you have a bow like that, you can use that on a wreath. You can use it on a cinnamon broom. A lot of people this time of year love those cinnamon brooms because they add a lot of fragrance. You can use that anywhere on an arrangement where you've cut decorative grasses from your home, anything like that that will work with a bow. Now, as we move on to other bows, If you wanted to decorate, say, a potted plant, you want to do something a little simple just to add a little color to it as a gift. This is the satin really inexpensive ribbon, and I'm going to do exactly the same thing, but I'm going to do it with wire. Again, I'm pulling that back so that the good side is showing the whole entire time. And the wire is going to be hard for you to see because it's 26 gauge. But again, I have taken it and made that hairpin curve. And what I am doing is from the front, again, you're not hurting this ribbon at all because you're wanting to scrunch it up anyway. And there you have a very simple little bow that could go in a plant or an arrangement or something of that type. And because you have this wire, I'm going to grab a plant to show you. Because you have the wire, you've got something to actually stick down into your pot. And again, you're just adding a little color. Now, this time of year, I've been picking out, of course, colors for fall. If this being a Christmas cactus, and if you're not sure if you have a Christmas cactus, Thanksgiving cactus, or an Easter cactus, email me. I'll send you pictures so that you'll know what the differences are on how the leaves are. So you'll know when to expect them to bloom. But what you've done is you've added a little color, especially if you had one that was getting ready to bloom. You could take just a little bit of that same color of those blooms, and you've just made it a little bit more festive. And it just draws attention to a gift that you have put together yourself. And once you play with it, you start working with it, then ribbon and wire doesn't become so difficult. So we're going to go on to a florist bow. And sometimes this is very hard to see. And if you would like one-on-one help with that, call me. We'll arrange to sit out in the lobby 6 feet apart, and I can walk you through it one at a time. And I'm more than happy to do that, to show you how it's done. Bring your own ribbon and we'll deal. But when we do this with these, yes, ma'am.
Oh, we just had someone else join.
Okay.
That's perfect. Maybe this
Welcome.
is a good time if anyone has any other questions before we move on to the next
Yes.
bow.
Or are there any questions?
Yeah, if anyone has questions, you can either unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can just type it into the chat box and I will read it out for you.
Real quick before we move on to the other bow, using that single loop bow, if you made about 10 or 15 of them, that's enough to decorate, say, a small wreath, a small Christmas tree, and you can use the colors of whatever works for the theme in your home. It could be, obviously red, gold, whatever.
We have a question. Just a
Question?
second. All right. Says, did you say that any kind of ribbon is okay, or does it have to have wire? Good question.
It is a very good question. The reason I use wire with these classes, the wire ribbon, is because it's easier for you starting out. That wire helps you to manipulate it when the bow is done so that you can make it exactly the way you want it. That wire is going to hold. Also, if it's a big enough bow, wire can be stuffed with a little bit of tissue paper, stored in a bag, and those bows can be used year after year. Does it have to have wire? No. The yellow one that I made did not. Those are a little bit more difficult to work with because you don't have something already inside that you can manipulate and fix mistakes. There's other ways to fix mistakes when making bows. Just like with any kind of craft or art, happy mistakes can also make happy creative differences in what you're doing. If you had many loops and one of your loops doesn't catch or comes free and things like that, you can trim them and make them look very exotic, and you can make your bows look kind of fun. So there are ways to actually trim and work with all types of ribbon. There's paper ribbons out there, there's raffia, there's all kinds of things that you can do that with. It just, we use the wire here because it's a little easier for you as a beginner. It's kind of cheating, and that's fine. I don't mind cheating.
Right. One other thing.
Did that answer the question?
Yes, this person says thank you, and then says, will you show how to trim them and make them look exotic? Ooh.
Ooh. Well, I will show you with the yellow ribbon. I'm going to take about 3 yards. I do this often enough. I know about how much I'm pulling off at a time. But on purpose, I will make a mistake. You're going to start with a loop. You'll have a good side and a bad side. The bad side is going to be just like with fabric. It's not going to be as glossy. It won't be as pretty. You may see an edge like like you would with a selvage edge with sewing, whereas the good side is usually shinier, and it has usually the spray that is part of the sizing of the bow. Whether it's an acrylic, whether it's fabric, they almost all have some kind of sizing. And so what you're wanting is that good side to always show. Well, the bad side shows, you make a loop. Well, the bad side shows. How do you fix that bad side from showing? You make a half turn. Now, this is where you have to build up some muscle strength and some muscle memory. And that's where the practice comes in. And you make a loop. Well, again, that nasty bad side showing. So you make a half a loop or a half a turn for the next loop.
Zoom in so we can see that turn there.
See?
All right, we're ready.
And I'm going to because every time you do that, you're going to have the bad side show. So you make that half turn, you make a loop, you catch it with your fingers. You're catching it between your fingers.
All right, someone
They-
just had a question. If you want to
Yes.
unmute yourself, or you can type it in the chat, whatever you feel more comfortable with. I saw a hand up. Oh, are we good? Okay, well, if that question or whatever comes back, just let us know. You can either unmute or you can type your question in the chat and we'll pause. Or if you want us to review again, let us know, or go slower. We'll make it happen.
Obviously, we can stop at any time.
All right, we're good.
As we keep that half turn going each time we make a loop, that's giving you two things. It's giving you the good side of the ribbon showing, and because you've twisted it, you've added body to those loops. That means they're going to stand up. They're not going to collapse on you. And you can see there what I'm doing. Now I'm going to make a couple of more loops so you can see what happens if one of those loops comes through and we don't catch it. And you'll see what I mean by that here in just a second. It's about as big as we're going to make. Oh, I've got more. I can make that bigger.
All right.
Now I'm going to have a long tail on this. Now, when you take your wire, again, you're going to put it through the loop that you made to begin with, that first circle. And then you're going to catch everything hopefully, that you have twisted and put in the bow. In the back, again, you're going to twist toward the bow itself by twisting the bow.
Yep, and then we have another question. Let me pull that up. It says, are you making the loops larger as you go along?
Yes, but you don't have to. If you don't make them larger, they tend to look more like a store-bought bow. If you make them a little larger as you go, it's a little easier to manipulate them. Now, as you see, when I pull them out, it doesn't matter which way I go. They tend to look a little bit more balanced as a bow. Did that answer the question? As I pull these loops out, now we're going to pretend that one of these loops didn't work well, that it didn't get caught, that it came out. And what you would have you'd have a long loop right in the middle. So what you would do is you would come through and you would literally, you just snap it and trim it. And then you would pick one on the other side to do the same thing with and make it look like, hey, that's exactly what I meant to do. And then however long you want it to be, you cut and you trim your tails. And that's how you've made the mistake of an extra loop or a loop that maybe had gotten wrinkled. You can go in and you cut one side, then cut the other. Because you've caught it in the center and it's twisted, it takes an awful lot to yank it out once you've tightened that bow down. Do you have a question, anybody? I'm also going to show you about different ways you can actually trim the bow. Obviously, you can trim your tails at an angle. You can trim them by gently, not completely folding and creasing, but pulling the sides together parallel and cutting outward to give you that look, or to cut inward to make it more like an arrow. And of course, if you're doing something silly or you're doing something for a child and you want to make it fun, you can always come in and do really interesting, cool cuts where, oh, I thought I had that in there. Where you can do something that would be maybe if you were doing something a little bit more fantasy oriented with pink and yellow unicorns and things like that. You may want something that would look a little bit more out there. So that's okay too. You just don't want to leave it flat across because that doesn't look like it's finished. We definitely want it to look finished. That's the way we meant the bow to look.
And to answer the last question, yes, we're recording this, so it will be up on the Jefferson County Extension YouTube page by the end of the week or early next week, depending on any tech issues we have.
Now, one thing I will say about ribbon, always look on the ribbon. It's going to tell you either in feet or yards what you have. For that size bow that I would call a florist bow, for the larger bow, you're needing approximately 3 yards. You're going to add more if you need longer tails. If it's wider ribbon, you're going to need close to 5 yards. So do the math on what you purchase to make sure you have enough to work with.
And a
One-
yard is approximately how many feet?
3 feet. And if you're into meters, meters is good. About 2.5 meters will work. Now, as far as where to purchase, you can purchase, of course, at all the craft shops and so forth. Where I have found the least expensive, but really gorgeous stuff like this, and it does have wire in it, and they had all kinds of colors at big box stores, both Costco and Sam's. I don't endorse them specifically because we can't, but you're talking about getting for about $6, you're getting 50 yards. That will decorate most of your home. It's enough to decorate an entire tree. And you can actually use this as garland around it after you've made a big bow at the top. You can still use it as garland, even if you're doing something else at the top. You can put it all the way around a very large wreath. If you're wrapping, of course, brooms or swags, or even just around the steps, and you want to put a bow at the bottom or at the top, but you also want to wrap it around steps. This is excellent. And because it has the wire in it, it's going to hold. But there were some really gorgeous colors. They had some beautiful blues. They had some ombre colors. They had some, what I would call jewel tones, some purples and things like that. So, and they had them in different widths. They had the number 9, which is this size ribbon. And then they had the 40, which is this size, only it was in a great big package.
Well, that actually leads into this question that came up, which is if you are using 2 different ribbons in one bow, should they be the same width?
They can be, they don't have to be. Last year, we decorated all up and down the stairs here with 2 different colors. You don't need as much yardage because you're getting twice the loops each time you twist. So you don't need quite so much as far as yardage. But yes, once you get your finger muscles, I wouldn't start with that. But once you get your finger muscles going to where they don't cramp, and if you're in the middle of a bow and your fingers cramp, switch to the other hand and shake it off. Then go back. Depending upon whether you're left-handed or right-handed depends on how you hold it. I'm right-handed, so I do my twisting with my right hand and I do the holding with my left. If most of the people I have taught bow making to, they do just the opposite if they're left-handed. It just depends on how ambidextrous they actually are. But with scissors, wire cutters, a little bit of wire, and a little bit of ribbon, you can do some decorating on a small scale, or you can get the big stuff and do it on a large scale. There is a new wholesale florist supplier in the Louisville area. I don't know much about them. So if you were going to get into this full-time or you wanted to look into that, they're online, but I cannot remember what their name is and I have not been there. But they do carry ribbon in bulk, and they're going to carry the inexpensive stuff as well as the more expensive things. And of course you can make your own ribbon if you sew. I've even made ribbon out of newspaper. You tape it together, you gently make your bows, and it can look really cool if you've wrapped a gift in the funny papers where there's color, and then you take the regular news wrap and newspaper and make a bow out of it. It's kind of kitschy, but it's kind of fun to do. So once you get going, you can make ribbon out of anything that you can make thin enough to work with. And like I said, I'll be glad to walk you through it again, or if you want to meet me in person, bring your supplies and we'll sit 6 feet apart and I'll be glad to do that out in the lobby. Bow making's fun because you can transfer it to so many different things, gifts, decorating, all kinds of things for any time of year, but especially this time of year and especially this year. We have time to do things at home and we want to make everything sparkle. Even if we can't always be with everybody we want to be all the time, at least we can have our home make us feel like we're in the spirit. So whatever spirit is moving you, we want to help you be there.
All right, another question.
Sure.
Next question is, do you have time to show us how to make that bow looks like a store-bought for a present?
Actually, to be honest with you, it's very inexpensive to buy. You can, and I have seen them at Walmart too. You can buy those. They actually, it's a circle and it has pins up and you just weave your ribbon around it. And it has a center where you put either wire, depends on how the bow maker is made, or it has a tab that goes in there that holds it. And actually that's the best way to do it rather than to do it by hand. Because it's really hard to find this, and it's all done with this type of ribbon when you purchase say a bag of bows. And if you're talking about those, they're much better made on one of those because they're all consistent. They're very consistent. And the kits come, the bow makers come all exclusive where you can make them one right after the other. The problem is finding this, it's got to be, as the numbers go down with ribbon, this is number 9. What you're working with on those is a 5 or a 3. So you're talking about a much thinner ribbon to go through that. And then you're going to punch down into the center of it to have that real fluffy half circle dome bow. You can do it with thinner ribbon. I just didn't bring any out. I've got some I could dig out, but to make it really look like that, you would want to use a bow maker simply because it's in the long run, it's easier. I don't know if that answered the question. You can do it. It just, you're going through a whole lot to do it when the bow makers can do it. So you can make them in about a minute and a half. And you're not stretching your fingers out. And if the phone rings or something like that, you can just drop it and go back to it. Not having to, go back and forth.
Are there other questions or do folks want to see any of the bows made again? If that would be helpful.
I'll be glad to.
What about the florist bows made with wire? I know
Okay.
when I've learned from you, that's that was super helpful for me. And if you're starting, right, that would be a good.
Right. And you will notice I used a green chenille stem. You don't see any green on the front of that bow. You see it on the back, but you don't see it on the front. One other thing about chenille stems, if you're putting it on a wooden stairway or something like that, definitely use chenille stems, even if you have to wire them together to get it to go around whatever it is, because this won't scratch. Wire can actually scratch. We don't want to damage the finish on any kind of wooden appliance or railing that you might put it on. Now, if it's a metal railing, chances are it's not going to be an issue. But we always want you to protect, of course, the finish on any wooden furniture or railings you might be putting it on. Now, again,
Just real quick before we start, it says the exotic, when someone was asking to see the exotic bow, is this the big The
Now-
big yellow florist bow?
Yes.
Just making sure we're showing
actually-
you the right one.
Yes, actually, if you want to make it look like a mum, like a giant mum, now, this is showing my age, but you used to get homecoming mums. They were huge. You used to buy them in high school for homecoming. Well, you can do that by going through each of these loops and cutting it at an angle. And you can make this look very much like a flower. And it's really cool to do it with red because it looks like a poinsettia. But it was a little early for poinsettia, so I didn't bring the red out. I apologize. I should have. But this is what I mean by something a little bit more exotic. You're making a bow, but it looks a little different.
And then when you're done with that one, to show one more time how to make a bow, the florist bow. Awesome.
So you see where this looks very, very petal-like. When researching bow making, it was done to use scrap fabric and to add embellishment to, of course, clothing, hair, and other kinds of accessories. And also, many people did that to make something that looked like it came from outdoors when it was in the winter. So there's several different reasons why bows started to catch on. And some of this goes back to about the 15th, 14th century when people started making bows and loops. And if you look at some of the old historic movies, you'll notice if they've really done a good job on the costuming, you'll see where they've made ribbon roses and all kinds of things out of ribbon because that was fabric that was left over that then they could manipulate to make into accessories. I just thought I'd throw that in there because, you know, it's no fun without trivia. But you see how you can actually make that look really exotic. You can make it look different and it's still very festive. This is really pretty on a contrasting color gift because it's different. It's a fun bow. And of course, you can always take fabric paint and do any kind of sparkly stuff for children or for a teenager, because in my experience, teenage girls just can't get enough sparkly stuff, most of them. So that's always fun to play with. Now to go on to the wire one, again, 1, 2, 3. Now I have short arms, but I've been doing this long enough that I kind of have an idea. So we're going to have our wire here ready to go. And we're going to, again, if you'll notice, the good side is shiny and the back side, not so much. Now, there could be a reason that you would want the back side, in which case that's the good side for you. But we'll do it with shiny because I'm all about sparkly today. And besides, when it sheds a little bit, I can go home and look very, very sparkly for the evening. When I go out, I'll be all dressed up without even thinking about it. So again, you're starting with that single bow or loop. And this is the bad side, and you can see it's the bad side because you don't have active sparkle like you do here. You can actually see the glitter, and you can just see the glitter through this, but it's not quite as sparkly. So we are going to make that half loop. If you're wanting to measure, start with a little bit more than your 3 fingers that aren't holding. That gives you an idea on that first one. And then you just eyeball it. If it's not perfect, you can move this up and down. And again, you're turning it so that good side is showing, that sparkle. And yes, I am placing it as I go, but you can do them
Come
one
around.
one right behind the other. Can you all see that well? You can see how I'm holding it. Now, if I got a cramp in my hand and I needed to exchange for a minute, you just come in and you do that. Okay, so what happens if, oh my goodness, I let it go? Well, you have all of these little telltale signs that show you where your loops were. So you just start over. That's the nice thing about having a little bit of wire in it. You're really going to see where your loops were if you have to let go for some reason. And you just go back up and pick up where those bruises or where the turn was, where you have creased the ribbon. And you see here, I'm going kind of one right after the other. So I'm not going to place these as I go now. And I'll show you it turns out just as pretty. And I am making them a little bit bigger. Now, if you were doing this for a child's bow for their hair, you might want to keep it just like this, because many bows are made that way. But I'm going to continue on. And I watch. And when I get to the point where I know I've got double what I want for tails, and this was about 3 yards, then I get my chenille stem, I go through that center loop. See that? Back to the back, so I pick it up, and I press on that wire to make sure I get it good and tight, and I twist the bow so that it tightens toward the bow. If you tighten the wire, it tightens out and the bow is really loose. And we want those loops to stay where you want. Now, as far as placing, you've got your center, and then you pull one side to the other, leaving one at least in the center. And it's the same on each side, if you can see that. And if you want to pull some from another loop, you can do that, because it's not so tight that you can't rearrange a little bit. Then if you really want to tighten, you go back in and you tighten it further, if you knew it was going to be outside and so forth. That's the other thing. If it's outside, you might want to spray this with a little Scotch Guard, because this is Kentucky. Between now and the first of the year, if it's outside, we can have wind, rain, snow, ice. So a little Scotch Guard wouldn't hurt if it's going to be outdoors. But you can see, because of the wire, you can make these really big and wide loops. You can adjust them, you can pull them down, you can do anything you want with it. And again, as always, when we give it that final haircut, I always just go at an angle because it's the easiest. But you look like you finished it and it looks decorative. And again, working with the wire is the easiest for a beginner, because this is going to hold it for you. It's going to do some of the work for you. But if you want to work with it in person, we'll do social distancing and we will play. My boss has let me do that. For the next class in 2 weeks, it will be cutting greenery from outdoors. We'll be using some bows, but I won't be talking specifically about that. But in 2 weeks, we're going to be doing that using greenery so that you can cut it. It's time to do pruning. Any of your broadleafed evergreens, any of your boxwoods, your magnolias are gorgeous. Any of those types of shrubs, taxus, that you have on your property or in your landscape, we can cut pieces of those. And I'll be showing you how to make small tabletop arrangements with that. And we'll be using things from the dollar store and so forth, where you can keep it very inexpensive, or you can use very expensive ornaments if that's what you want to do. But you have the choice of doing whatever fits your pocketbook. So this is getting us started kind of with the holiday spirit. So hopefully this is helpful to you. And again, if you have questions, then you can email me or let me know if you want to come by with some ribbon and some wire, and we'll work on it.
All right. And to get in touch with Carol, you can email her at Carol, CAROL.Wilder, WILDER, at uky.edu. Or you can call the Jefferson County Cooperative Extension Office, 502-569-2344. We're open Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30. And you can set up a time if you want to bring your crafts and socially distance craft with Carol to get some help. She's a great teacher. And we will also have this video up on the Jefferson County Extension YouTube page. If you want to view it again and get your ribbons and craft alongside Carol from the comfort of your home too. So if you all, I'm going to stop recording, and you all are welcome to hang out with any questions that you have or head out for today.